we are recording this webinar like all other webinars. When we're done, this will be posted on the website so that you can review it later, show it to other members of your team. Additionally, a little housekeeping at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a place where you can ask questions either in the chat box or the Q&A, whichever one you choose to use. And then at the end of this, Colin will read those, and I'm happy to answer anything. And again, this was a last-minute change of topic to third-party service provider. And this actually is something that should matter significantly to you, because you are, in fact, a third-party service provider. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But you're going to be able to leverage that to gain new clients away from your competition when you button up your own risk, and leverage how they, in fact, aren't even considering this as they sell in their portfolio of security services. And we all know, we've had conversations about this on our other webinars, that a lot of MSPs and even some MSSPs, they put together a brief security stack, a short stack, if you would, and they call themselves a security provider when they really haven't covered the entire landscape. And even if they were to add a significant number of elements of technology to cover that, almost no one thinks about third-party service providers. And this is really where you get an opportunity to differentiate yourself, especially because of the regulatory landscape that is now pushing this down on your customer. So we're going to look at this, and as I said, it's a slightly different webinar in two ways. The first way was the change of topic. The second way is that to some degree, you're going to be able to use a lot of this content when you talk to your clients and prospects out there, giving them assurances relative to third-party risk. In fact, one of the free things that we're going to give at the end of this webinar, and there's a few things, is I'm actually going to give you a webinar that you can use when you go out and sell your security services. The one I'm going to give you is tailored to a very specific niche. You'll just take that out and use your own niche, if you would. Okay? So let's jump into this. Okay, so this is our agenda. It's a short agenda. This will probably be a short webinar because third-party service providers, they're limited in scope, not relative to who they are, but what you need to be doing to help your client. And there's only so much visibility upstream in the chain of custody. And you'll be very familiar with that term by the time we're done with this webinar. And so it's a reasonably short agenda that we're going to get through. All of this stuff you're going to want to absorb because you're going to want to become conversant in this. And you will, in fact, because it's not terribly difficult, but you need to get yourself accustomed to the language of this, because these things like chain of custody, like regulatory burden, like third-party service provider, most people don't talk in those terms, and that's where you're giving yourself an opportunity at differentiation. Okay? Like all our webinars, I want to begin by getting you in the mindset of thinking bigger. Think beyond the MSP mindset that you're in, the mindset that has you thinking about selling products. You want to think about selling solutions. MSPs sell products. They sell antivirus, firewall, et cetera, and they call themselves a security provider. You sell solutions. You solve problems. Because MSSPs are managed security solution providers. And ultimately, and we've talked about this in other webinars, what your clients and prospects look for is to have problems solved. They don't care what the tools are. We're the only ones who care. We who are geeks love the tools. God knows I do. Your clients could give a darn less about them. All they care about is you're solving a problem, what solution set you bring to the table. Putting into your quiver the arrow of third-party service provider solutions is an unbelievably powerful tool. In fact, I gave a webinar the other day on third-party service providers on behalf of one of our partners. That is a service we offer to our CyberGuard partners, that I will actually do the webinar on their behalf. There were over 30 people on that webinar, and they received a 15% response rate relative to more information. It is a powerful driver. It's a powerful driver because A, they worry about it, and B, nobody's talking to them about it. And when you start talking to them about it, you're going to start to see significant returns. So you're delivering a solution. So what is a third-party service provider? So third parties, and the definition's up here, but let me sort of put it in very simple terms. Okay? When you go to the store to buy something, the person you buy it for and you are first parties to the transaction. You buy something from your vendor. Your customer or your client buys something from you. You are technically first parties to that single transaction. When your client sells something to their customer, your client and their customer are first parties. You are providing a service to your customer, your client. You are the third party to their customer. This is a little confusing, I know, so just bear with me for a moment. So let's do that scenario a moment ago that I talked about where you go to the store and you buy something at the store. Whatever it is, doesn't particularly matter. When you swipe your credit card in the machine, the credit card processor for that store you went to is a third party to the transaction. The store is your first party, and you're the other first party. The credit card processor they use is a third party provider. And why is that important to understand? It's important to understand where you sit relative to your client's customer and your responsibility for your client's customer's data. This is why this is so important. So think about this again. You went to the store, you paid for something by credit card. The processor that the store uses to transact that credit card has your information. If that credit card processor were breached, technically in the state of California, in the state of New York, in the state of Virginia, the state of Florida, all over Europe, and soon throughout this country as well, the store is responsible if that data is stolen at the credit card level. So that's why this is so important. That third party, if they're breached, the store becomes responsible relative to the way the new regulations are being written. And they're all being rewritten to reflect this. And so if you think about it for a second, the risk associated with third parties has gone up considerably because your client is the one liable by law if that data gets lost. The store where the credit card was processed is ultimately responsible for making sure that you're made whole. So you don't have to go back to the credit card processor, you go right to the store. And so this third-party service provider element is a significant element of risk for your clients. And the regulators, the laws, the insurance companies that are now writing policies around cyber liability, property insurance, which also covers losses around breaches, believe it or not, if you didn't know that, it's true. They are rewriting their policies to reflect the risk of third party. It's a somewhat complicated topic, as I said. But when you get your arms around this, this is a substantial and significant differentiator for you. So effectively, anyone your client does business with to help that transaction go through is a third party. You are a third party to your client's business with their customer. Even if what you do doesn't in any way, shape, or form have anything to do with this product or service they deliver, simply because you have access to all the data in their system. Additionally, other third-party providers include the tangential tools that they use, some of which you may supply. So I know a lot of MSPs on this call, and I know that you provide email services for your clients. That email vendor is a third party. Now, because they're getting it from you, you're liable to them. They're liable to their customer. And that cascading chain of custody matters. These are, as I said earlier, they're memorialized in regulation today. These are just 4 of the myriad regulations under which third-party service providers are obligated to protect data. You, in fact, by law, are obligated to protect data depending on where you live today. Eventually, within the next 18 months, we expect, based on the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, who are effectively the superintendents in every state of the financial service businesses that are out there, and ultimately speak to all business transactions out there. We expect that to roll out nationwide, some form or fashion of these regulations. These regulations that you see here are just a handful of those that are out there that say third parties are obligated to protect data. You are obligated to protect data. And the beauty of that, when you become conversant in it, you're going to help your clients make sure everybody else they do business with protects data. As I said, I gave a webinar just the other day on this very topic on behalf of one of our partners, because all of these clients had all these other third parties that were putting them at risk. So this is why your clients must worry about it. All of those regulations make the client, your client, responsible for you and every other third party they do business with. And they make them liable because they make them the first point in recourse that the consumer has. Again, regulators build regulations and laws around protecting the consumer. You could argue that they do that for political reasons. I'd argue that, but that's just an opinion. They write these laws to protect the consumer, to make sure that the consumer understands ultimately what the risk is when they give over their data to somebody. So think about this in your world for a moment. Your client collects information. They collect credit card information. They collect name. Maybe they do credit apps because they have store credit that they offer. So you may grab Social Security information. Maybe they fill out forms that have dates of birth and other things that are not necessarily publicly available, that are defined in regulation as personally identifiable information, or PII. Excuse me. And so sitting on the systems you manage are personally identifiable information, PII. And it goes by other names and other regulations, but the generic term is PII. And so sitting on those systems that you manage is PII. Because your client is responsible at protecting it, and because you have direct access to it, anything that happens to you puts your client at risk. And so the regulations say this concept of custodial proxy, which is where their customer gave them information, and your client information, and your client has custodial proxy to use it only for the course of the transaction itself. And they have to do everything they can to protect it. They can't transfer it. That's the non-transference. They can't say, well, I gave it to ABC MSP and they had the breach, not me. They are not allowed to transfer that custodial responsibility of the data. And therefore, your clients assume liability. That's what assumptive liability is. They take responsibility for you. Your clients are saying to their customers, yes, I take responsibility for ABC MSP who manages my network. And therefore, your clients have to make sure that they understand the chain of custody. What does that mean? That means they have to understand what they do with the data, who they hand it off to, and whom they hand it off to, what those people do with the data. So your clients at some point may or may not ask you, well, what do you do with the system? Who has access to those systems? Who can see this personally identifiable information? Do you give it to anybody else? Is there anybody else downstream? Also third-party providers, by the way, to whom you give that data. So anybody out there on this call, if you're using a company like Virtual Help Desk, or you're using Continuum, or you're using the 20, I'm not saying that whether they're good or bad companies. I'm simply saying that by you using them, you're giving them access to your client data. They become third parties to the transaction. And by law, technically under the California Consumer Privacy Act, you're supposed to disclose that to your client if they ask, because your client is obligated to tell their customer if the customer asks. It's a significantly onerous law. It is a law that's working its way, as I said, through the U.S. That notwithstanding for a moment, that chain of custody also means, by definition, that if the Continuums or the 20s of the world get breached, and this consumer data or this client's data, this customer's data is exposed, that customer can sue your client can come for you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they need to understand the chain of custody, which by definition means you need to understand the chain of custody. And the regulation is designed to mitigate risk. They want to make sure that to the extent possible, the first parties of the transaction assume all of the risk. And that's why this concept of custodial proxy and non-transference and assumptive liability are in there. And then there's presumptive liability. And that presumptive liability means that when you're handing it off, you are presuming you still own it. So for instance, if you're using Continuum or the 20, again, I'm not singling them out, but for any other reason, then they are just the more popular ones if you outsource your help desk, as an example. If you're using cloud antivirus or other cloud products where data is stored, if you're using vendors like eFolder or Datto that store in their own cloud, do they have access to the data? Who has access to the data? These are the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of third party. It's a big topic. I said that early on. But once you get your arms around it, you can start to see how you're able to differentiate yourself from others out there. And these are some of the reasons why your clients, you know these are well-known breaches that are out there. Many of these, all of these, excuse me, in some form or fashion are most likely third parties to some of your clients already. Right? If they advertise on Facebook, if they advertise on LinkedIn, if they use First Data for transaction processing, things like that. So these are the major hacks that are out there and in the news. Some of the things that rose the hairs on the back of the neck of the regulators, which got all of this thing moving forward. Some of you also may use that. If they get hacked with you doing advertising. You use the same username and password. It gets out there on the dark web, and that breach bleeds into you. You just need to be cognizant of the fact of what that chain of custody data looks like, especially if you're doing advertising on behalf of your clients. I know a lot of MSPs who are doing advertising. They're in some of the marketing groups. I see them out there. And they're advertising on the Facebook and LinkedIn on behalf of their clients, which by definition makes them third parties, not the clients, but the Facebooks and the LinkedIn of the world. And again, third-party breaches is a stat you may or may not know. It's a great stat to use when you're talking to your customers. This is in the stat. This is one of the slides in the deck I'm going to give you at the end of this webinar that you can use to talk to your clients about it. Third-party breaches expose twice as many records. That's just a fact of life. If you think about it, you really think the number should be higher. Because when a third-party vendor is breached, they've got a bunch of MSPs under them. So if you're breached, you only have so many clients. Your third-party vendors have hundreds of MSPs. And so you can see that's a much larger scale. That notwithstanding, on average, third-party breaches expose twice as many records. Again, another reason why the regulators are concerned about it, a reason why your clients are starting to be concerned about it, a reason why you need to be concerned about it. Not so much because you're not protecting yourself. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you want to be aware of this as you consider your vendors and as you step into the role of that security advisor. We talked about that on other webinars before, right? You're no longer talking to purchasing directors, you're talking to the C-suite. You are helping them mitigate risk. You need to understand that and be able to convey to them that when they are dealing with third-party providers, the risk of a breach goes up significantly and the impact is twice that of any other type of breach. And here's why you have to be ready. So you have to first begin to think about this in your own terms. The Department of Homeland Security, some of you have seen those alerts from us. Some of you maybe get this on your own, but they released an alert last year and again the beginning of this year that MSPs and MSSPs are being targeted by hackers. Hundreds of thousands of times a day, MSPs all over the U.S. are being targeted by Chinese and other hackers, not just Chinese. So there are other hackers that are doing it. Chinese tend to be the biggest one. They are releasing this alert. It's getting lots of press. Your clients are hearing about it, by the way. One of those that was in the news, big headlines all over CNBC and Fox Business Network, some of it made the mainstream news as well, was when Wipro got hacked. Third largest MSP in the world, and they got hacked. Simple phishing hack. Exposed millions upon millions of records in that hack. Now that was a phishing attempt that was successful, that got them breached. But there are other opportunities for a breach in your tool set. If you think about what tools you use and how secure your vendors are. And so again, you have these people who sell products. How much do they really know about the products they sell? And I would say yourselves too, if you were to honestly reflect upon your tool set, how well do you know your tool set in terms of how well is it protected? How secure are they? It's a great question to ask. And not all your vendors are going to be able to answer that. We worked with an MSP on just this topic in the past. So let's go out to, and we help them button up their own house. Let's go out to our vendors. I want your privacy policy. I want to know how you protect our data because we've got clients that are liable for it in California under CCPA, and we want to make sure that we, in the chain of custody, understand how this looks. And it was blank faces. Some of them didn't even have a public-facing privacy policy, which, by the way, they have to have. But they didn't even have that. So you need to know your tool set. And as I said earlier, the regulations define this. The NAIC, which is the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, I mentioned that earlier. GDPR and CCPA we've talked about earlier and on other calls. So you've got regulations working their way downstream. You've got the federal government and the Department of Homeland Security out there screaming from the top of their lungs saying, hey, MSPs are being attacked. And then you have the headlines talking about major breaches. You don't really see the flaws in the tool set in the headlines, but you need to know that if you're going to lead with security, which I strongly encourage. This should be the frontline pitch. You are an MSSP, a managed security solutions provider. Lead with security. And knowing third-party risk is key. And ultimately, your clients trust you, and this is really why you need to worry about that. There isn't anybody on this call who would tell me their clients distrust them. Nobody says that their product sucks less, their services sucks less, right? Everybody's client trusts them. You need to make sure that that trust is well earned. They're going to rely on you. Who better to rely on than their MSSP or MSP when evaluating third-party risk? They don't know what to look for. They wouldn't even begin to know how to form a chain of custody of data information relative to their other third-party providers. One of the other things we're going to give you at the end of this webinar is a third-party service provider security posture survey form that you can use, A, to give to your clients, demonstrating how secure you are, but B, that you can help your clients go to their other third parties to identify and button up risk. So where to start? It's one of my favorite pictures because it tells everything I want to say, right? You have to start by looking at yourself. How secure am I? Are my tools as strong as they need to be relative to protecting the data? What's their privacy policy look like? Are they sitting in a data center that's SOC compliant? Is their team SOC compliant? If their team has access to data, they should be. And these are things that, and most vendors are, so I'm not saying that you're working with a vendor that isn't. I'm simply saying that you need to know whether or not they are. What you'll find is, as you go through this exercise, you are quickly going to become an expert on what to ask, what to look for, when you just do by doing this to yourself, by looking in the mirror and saying, okay, let's evaluate our security posture. And you begin by taking a risk assessment. We did a whole webinar on risk assessments, and so I would encourage you to go back and view that if you haven't, if you weren't on it, or if you haven't viewed it. We have a whole webinar on risk assessments. They are the starting point, the jumping off point for how to evaluate the risk posture, because they look at all elements of an organization. That's why I said we do it for ourselves. So we walk the walk. We don't just talk the talk. You evaluate your company at 3 levels: administrative, physical, and technical. All too often we focus on the single products in the technical space. We don't look at the way they work together, nor do we look at ourselves as a company from a security posture. I'd argue most of the people on this call today probably haven't put any of their team members through security awareness training. If you have, kudos to you. Awesome. What are you doing in the way of refreshers? How often are you sending out refreshers to your own team members? There's an old saying, the shoemaker's children don't have shoes. It's a saying because most of the time we're so busy out there protecting our clients and selling to them that we forget to take care of ourselves. So start by looking from within. It's a great way to get your arms around this concept of third-party service provider risk. And then once you do that, you have a much better way of selling out to your clients how you can provide them a solution to third-party service provider risk and help button that up. And again, because the regulators are looking for custodial proxy, non-transferred, you need to know what are you doing with that data. Who has access to it in the Dattos of the world, in the 20s of the world, etc.? Are they conversant in the privacy policy? Is it sitting in a SOC data center, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? One of the other things that I like to ask, it's not on this list, is do you have insurance? What's your cyber liability insurance look like? Can we get named as an additional insured? If you don't know what that is, ask your insurance professional. I am not an insurance salesman. But you want to ask your insurance professional, how do we get named as an additional insured? What if they get breached? You want to make sure that you have cascading protection from their insurance carrier. This is what regulators look for. And we talked about this a little bit, but again, this is sort of what it looks like in a broad sense. Right? There you are in the middle. You're an MSP. You've got your vendors on one side and your clients on the other. If your vendor gets hacked and you're using them, that will cascade right out to your clients. And so you have to be evaluating all of these areas of your relationship with your clients and your customers to make sure that you're doing your best to protect them. because this speaks to the chain of custody. How does data move from the first party transaction, that transaction between your client and their customers, all the way up to your toolset providers and your vendors that you do business with and back? You have to know this, and you have to be ready to speak to it with authority. And once you can do that for yourself, again, you're going to have a much better understanding of how this matters to the client, how you can better help them. And just like yourself, it starts with a risk assessment. Again, we did a webinar on this. It's in green because this is where you make money. Most of our MSP partners sell risk assessments anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000, depending on the size of the client. I haven't seen anybody selling that for less than that. Because there's a lot that goes into it. There's some manpower that goes into it. Again, once you get conversant at it, the manpower is significantly less. But you want to make sure that you understand what their organization looks like. And that's what the risk assessment is going to do. You're going to deliver policies to them, documentation to them, help them understand their organization better. There are other elements to that, business impact analysis. Again, I've gone over some of this. I don't want to belabor these points. They're part and parcel of other webinars that I've done. Some things that people don't think about, that I haven't talked about in other webinars, are this entire concept of third party, which is what this is all about, but also the concept of agreement and contract audit. You have contracts with your client. You know what they look like. You can easily read the contracts that they have with their other third-party providers. Leverage your attorney. Have them look at it. You can resell your attorney's services by way of reviewing the contract. You are providing a third-party service provider audit mechanism for them that they are completely in the dark about. They're obligated to do it by regulation. They don't know how to do it. You're going to provide a way for them to do it. And I mentioned insurance before as well. How else can you help them? Drive encryption. These are tools you already know, so I don't have to go through this. Two of the interesting things on here, actually. One of them has a side product that's already there, but two of the interesting things that are on here are this concept of secure voicemail to email and secure fax to email. Secure fax to email, a lot of people on this call sell VoIP. No VoIP provider today, none. And I don't say that casually. I've spoken to all the heavy hitters that are out there. They do not offer secure fax or secure voicemail to email. Meanwhile, they all offer voicemail to email and fax to email, all of them. And so these elements, which right now CyberGuard is working with a VoIP provider to deliver this solution to you guys, and we are soon going to have a secure VoIP solution that offers secure voicemail to email and secure fax to email, so be on the lookout for that. But these are currently being evaluated by the regulators, because when a customer of a client leaves a voicemail with PII and that voicemail gets sent through email, it's being sent completely exposed. And by definition, that's not compliant with regulation. And they're actually writing into some of the reg to speak to this very topic. So even the 800-pound gorillas in the world that sell VoIP services don't have this facility or feature. Even if they were to offer it, even if you were to build your own 3CX solution, as an example, you'd still have to find a way to secure that email, that fax or voicemail to email on the way out to your customer. And let's say, for argument's sake, you could for a moment. You also need to encrypt it at rest when the faxes and the voicemails are sitting on those machines. And as I said, nobody's doing that today. We will soon be offering that to you as our partners that you can then in turn resell to your customers. Okay? So I said this was a bit of a shorter topic, and it was going to be a little bit confusing because third-party service providers are not necessarily something that you can just buy off the shelf and say, here you go. Here's a way to solve a third-party service provider. It's something you need to get your arms around and understand. We're here to help you. Happy to help you all day long. I did a webinar on this for one of our MSPs just the other day, as I said. So strongly encourage you to leverage our expertise in this. For attending this webinar, we're going to give you a third-party service provider compliance form that you can use to give to your customers to demonstrate your own compliance, as well as something that they can use for their other third parties. I'm going to give you a copy of the webinar that we use for one of our other MSPs. You're also going to get a marketing campaign for us, letter, call, script, just like we do on all the other ones. Okay? And these are the services that CyberGuard offers. And on that, if anybody has any questions, there may or may not be a lot of them. This is a somewhat confusing topic, I know, but anything out there, Colin?
Yeah, I have one question now, and be sure to get your questions in by the end. The question I have is, how can I find affordable and then sell cyber insurance right now? This is from an MSP who says he does not have any cyber insurance in place.
Oh, he doesn't have cyber insurance in place. Okay, so there are some insurance companies that we know and work with. Happy to recommend. Send me an email and I'll make an intro. If you're a member of some of the industry groups that are out there, for instance, Technology Marketing Toolkit and others, there are insurance providers that are also vendors on those platforms, and you can look out there. Two things you want to be careful about insurance. And again, I don't sell insurance. I know enough about it to be dangerous. But there are two elements to it. You want to make sure what the exclusions look like. Exclusions are those elements of an insurance policy that says, we don't pay if. They're excluded from coverage. That's called an exclusions. Also note that frequently your property insurance has an element of payout for breach. So you should get somebody who can read the policies and understand the policies. They are difficult to read and digest, and I don't say that lightly. So if you have a trusted insurance advisor that you use today, you should speak to them about that. Let them know what you're concerned about, and they'll write something. Send me an email. I'm happy to make an introduction. I know several of them that would be more than happy to talk to you about that. Also, I have a great attorney who I can refer you to, who's actually, his firm is of counsel for one of the national insurance associations. So those are all great resources to use. You definitely want to get cyber liability. I will tell you, one of the webinars that I did about, I forget how long ago it was, and it was to the insurance space. And now on that webinar, one of the interesting facts that came out of it, because Marshall & Sterling, who's a large insurance company, was on that webinar, and they said that their average payout on a small breach is about $63,000. $63,000. So you want to make sure, I mean, I know I don't want to take that hit. And so we do have cyber liability insurance. You want to make sure that you do have the insurance. You also want to make sure what it's going to cost if your client's asked to be named as an additional insured. An additional insured means that if your breach bleeds down to affect them, your insurance carrier is going to insure them for their costs relative to you having been breached. So you want to make sure that all of those things are in place. Again, I'm not an insurance guy, though. So if you have an insurance person, you're going to certainly want to speak to them. If not, I am more than happy to make an introduction in that regard. Anything else out there?
Nope, didn't get any more questions in. That was it.
All right, awesome. So again, I know it was a somewhat confusing topic, and I apologize for the last minute change of topic. We just had so many requests for people, so many questions about third-party service provider. I suspect that something was released in the industry that said you want to make sure that your third-party that your third-party providers are protecting data, though I haven't seen anything on that. Colin's going to make sure that you all get let me just jump back to that page for a second, that you all, I'm here somewhere, that you all get the compliance form, you all get a copy of the webinar, and you all get access to the marketing campaign. My contact information, again, is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. More than happy to answer any of your questions. If you want to set up a time to call, happy to have a conversation with you. Thanks for joining us. Everybody have a great day.